Well, U.S. President Donald Trump set off a political firestorm this week when he fired the man leading the investigation into whether his campaign knowingly colluded with Russian intelligence to sway the 2016 election. Now, the White House says the firing of FBI Director James Comey had nothing to do with the Russia probe, but now opposition Democrats are intensifying their demands to launch an independent investigation. VOA senior national correspondent Jim Malone has our report.
In the Senate, Democrats, including leader Chuck Schumer, demanded that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein now appoint a special counsel to lead the investigation into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia during last year's U.S. election.
He must appoint a special prosecutor and get his investigation out of the hands of the FBI and far away from the heavy hand of this administration.
A White House spokeswoman rejected Democratic fears that Trump was trying to quash the Russia investigation.
There's no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, and we'd love for that to be completed so that we can all move on.
Russia is fake news.
President Trump has long dismissed the Russia probe as a hoax, but by firing Comey, Trump may have set in motion a chain of events that could lead to an even more robust probe into possible ties between his campaign and Russia.
And for the latest now on the fallout from the Comey firing, we are joined in Washington by VOA White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman, along with senior national correspondent Jim Malone, who filed that report for us. Thank you both for being here. Steve Herman, I want to talk to you, since you follow the White House very, very closely. What does this do to White House credibility? Are we seeing a crisis of confidence there right now?
I think at this point now there is no doubt about it, because the president is essentially throwing his own people under the bus, coming out and making comments in television interviews, reversing the narrative that had been put out there in the hours and days before by his own spokespeople.
Jim Malone, would you agree? I mean, the White House has been scrambling all week to get its message straight, and we can't seem to determine which one is actually correct.
At the heart of this storm is Donald Trump, the President of the United States. And like he did in his business empire, it all revolves around him, and at times the narrative seems to change, and he decides when it will change. I think that's one of the reasons he decided to do an interview with NBC television yesterday, talking about the fact that he had always intended to fire FBI Director Comey, even though throughout the week we had different explanations as to the chain of events. It put White House aides and Vice President Mike Pence in very difficult spots. But, you know, this is the way Mr. Trump has operated, not only since he came into office, but during the campaign.
Steve, is that the problem, that we have a president who's trying to run the country like a CEO?
Well, I think like a company that he is the head of, the CEO and president, and doesn't have shareholders to answer to. And when you're president of the United States, your stakeholders, your shareholders are the people of the United States. And you can't just decide on a whim what you want to say and what you're going to do. And so we're lacking, I think, that sense of awareness. And this is just putting the president into a deeper and deeper hole that he is digging himself.
Jim, was the White House unprepared for this firestorm? Did they not anticipate that something like this would blow up in their faces?
Well, reportedly, when the president talked to Senate Democratic leader Schumer in advance of his announcement, Schumer told him it was a mistake and not to do it. And then the president seemed surprised by that. You also have the president talking about the Comey business and contacts he had with Comey as FBI director, where he was saying Comey wanted to stay on, and then the president saying he asked 3 times if he, Donald Trump, was the subject of an investigation, and he says Comey offered him assurances he was not. We have yet to hear specifically from Mr. Comey about those specific charges, but Comey has said through intermediaries that he had been asked to pledge loyalty to Trump, which in a very raw way he opposed.
Steve, does that stand legal scrutiny? I mean, could this come back to hurt the president, those statements?
Yes, I think it could. The question is whether it will. We're definitely in a gray zone. A lot of legal scholars that you talk to say this potentially, if there are other parts of a puzzle that fit together, this could be a critical piece that leads to possible charges of obstruction of justice. Because you had the President of the United States asking the head of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country whether he was under investigation by that law enforcement agency. And this wouldn't pass a muster in a lot of countries around the world, and ultimately it may not pass muster in this country.
At the heart of this is the Russia investigation.
Sure.
Okay. It's an investigation he's called a hoax. Now his spokespeople say they want it to be done quickly, to go away from.
Sure, they just want this problem to go away.
But he said in the interview with NBC that Russia was on his mind as he was considering whether he wanted to fire Mr. Comey. Whatever he has done, we can disagree about the various, legalities and so forth. He has, in a sense, made it worse because he is now kind of ensured that it's going to be very difficult for Congress, especially the Senate, to back away from any Russia investigation and put a real spotlight on the Justice Department there.
Yeah.
There may be no smoking gun with the Russia links. There is none, certainly, at this point. But as Jim says, now we are going to have, I think, an unprecedented level of scrutiny since we have not seen since the Nixon era into looking into all of this. And as was the case with Watergate, the cover-up was worse than the crime.
The actual crime.
And we see all sorts of evidence playing out in real time on Twitter, where the President of the United States is now threatening the fired FBI director. This, as I tweeted out, I said, we're in uncharted territory now.
No, we totally are. And obviously the Democrats, Jim, are pouncing on this. They want some action here.
Well, they want a special counsel, a sort of separate investigation, although we don't have that independent counsel law anymore, so it would be someone appointed through the Justice Department. But yes, they want that. The people to watch, Mel, are the Republicans, particularly in the Senate. There are already some cracks forming. Some of them were very concerned about the Comey firing. They're being hesitant to speak up too strongly, but as things move along here, we're going to have to watch them very carefully because at a certain level, it is about the credibility of any independent investigation involving the President of the United States. It's a bedrock of our democracy.
Steve, is it going to require Senate approval to appoint a special prosecutor?
Well,
Yes.
this could come, yes,
it's going to require
but the deputy, as my understanding is the.
Well, I'm sorry,
deputy
Special. I
AG.
thought you were talking about an FBI director.
No.
Yeah, that comes from the Justice Department.
Oh, that will come from the...
Yes.
Now, speaking of the former FBI director, these comments that he was a grandstander, that he was a showboater, I mean, doesn't that almost automatically assume that Comey is going to have to respond to those
Well, I think he's going to be called before Congress to respond. And the thing we have to remember is the specific information that he learned about the investigation that as Jim said, is really at the heart of this. All this other stuff is a lot of smoke, very dark, smelly smoke, I would say. But
dark, smelly smoke, I'll have to remember that.
He still will, things that he saw that are classified, he is still compelled to protect that information. The president can declassify things and maybe saying things in public that where Comey, for example, may want to talk now or be able to talk about this so-called loyalty dinner that he was called into with the president, where supposedly the president asked Comey, when he was then FBI director, to pledge loyalty to him. So we may get a clearer idea of what that's all about. But as far as the details of the Russia investigation, I think whatever information that these senators have seen in closed briefings and that law enforcement officials have seen are not going to come out unless there are actually charges filed in cases later on.
I'm running out of time, Jim, but perhaps you can sort of summarize this for us. Has this issue reached the level of a Watergate type of scandal?
Well, I lived through Watergate. I'm not sure we're there yet. It's only been a few months. I do think what we're seeing, though, is something similar in Watergate. The credibility of the White House is being increasingly called into question, and that generally means that down the line it can be a problem.
Sure.
Because when you really want people to believe something you're saying, they already start from a point of skepticism.
Jim Malone and Steve Herman, thank you for that crisp insight and analysis of this issue. We'll be talking to you a lot more after this. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for that segment, but we'll be back. Speaking of the Russia probe, the president held a closed-door meeting with Russian diplomats one day after firing the FBI director. We'll tell you what they talked about, as well as other global issues, when we come back. This is a correspondent on Voice of America.